Good afternoon, everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome you to another Webinar Wednesdays brought to you by Canadian Associates of Ben-Gurion University. Because of the freezing wintry weather we in Canada are experiencing from coast to coast, it happens to be minus 24 degrees centigrade in Montreal. We decided to whisk you all away to the sunny desert of the Negev, directly to the House of the Hut, or as it is called in Hebrew, Hatzrif, of Paula and David Ben-Gurion. Ironically, though, the south of Israel is expecting a severe rainstorm with potential flooding and freezing cold temperatures, and Israel is expecting snow in the north. So, anyways, our intentions were great and honorable. Today, we are featuring the third in our Webinar Wednesday series, version 2.0. We've had 24 webinars before the new year, and this is our second one in 2022, a private and intimate look into David Ben-Gurion's hut. I'm again thrilled to tell you that we have just under 150 people, or we may even have surpassed that, registered for the program today. So everyone, please wipe your feet so you don't leave mud on the floors of the hut. I must say that if anything demonstrates the personality and values of this great man, it is indeed the simple and book-filled house. It is also a great opportunity to thank my outstanding staff from coast to coast who comprise the finest team of nonprofit organizations in Canada. They each have worked tirelessly to fundraise and friend-raise, and together, along with our lay leaders and our colleagues in Israel, we have achieved record results for the fourth year in succession. I'm so proud to say that we just featured on Sunday Israeli author Ido Geffen in part B of our 6-part series of our introduction for you to the modern and great Israeli authors. We had over 200 households subscribed with almost 400 people in attendance. Ido was fabulous. Today's webinar will obviously be departing from our regular format. I will introduce our guide, and then who is a fellow member of the British Commonwealth, and then hand the reins over to her. Following the tour, Galit Solomon, our Director of Communications and Marketing, will handle a short Q&A, and I will then wrap it up. Unfortunately, Yoni Galiziano, head of overseas program at the Ben-Gurion Heritage Institute, is sick at home with COVID, and of course, we all wish him very well and Hachlama Mihira, a speedy recovery. Esther Suissa, our main guide, is the head of overseas programs at the Ben-Gurion Heritage Institute at Midreshet Ben-Gurion. She was born in London, England, as was my mother, and made Aliyah in 1986, 11 years after I did. She holds a BA in Jewish History and French Literature, as well as a Master's in Jewish History. She is the proud mother of 5 Israeli-born children, or Sabras as they are known. She has lived in the south of Israel for a quarter of a century in Dimona, and now lives in Evan Shmuel. During Esther's tour, if any of our attendees think of a question or about something which you just saw in the hut, please write it down in the Q&A section, and they will be responded to almost immediately. Esther, the audience is all yours.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you for that common heritage with London. Always nice to hear. And shalom to our Canadian friends. I was just joking that here we're actually very cold, but it's around 5 degrees centigrade. So I know that that's sort of quite summery for you, but we're here in Boker. We're in the kibbutz. It's drizzling. The storm hasn't yet arrived. But I'm very excited, and thank you to Shimi and to Mark and Galit and everyone who's made it happen today. And we're actually here in the home of David and Paula Ben-Gurion. Soon I'm going to switch around. And I'd like to say that here, unfortunately, Yoni apologizes for not being here. He's with a fever at home, and some of our staff are also unfortunately sick. Hopefully this wave will pass. But even Ben-Gurion, who said out of every crisis, you should find an opportunity. And in the past 2 years, we've been giving virtual tours of the home here of the desert home here at Kibbutz de Boker. So out of all this chaos, some good has come out as well. And as Mark said, I look forward to questions. They can be written in chat or we can finish off afterwards. So here we are. I'm now going to switch around and show you Ben-Gurion's will and testament. And this is what he writes at the beginning of 1973. And he says, I'd like to donate my home and everything that's inside here to the public. And it should stay the same original character as it was as when we lived there. He then also asked to be buried next to Paula in Midreshet Boker, and he asked for no eulogies to be read at his grave. And I can just say that he died on the 1st of November, 1973. There's a famous newspaper headline a few weeks before saying Ben-Gurion is fighting for his life and Israel is fighting for his life, because it was after the outbreak of the Yom Kippur War and Israel was in dire straits. And unfortunately, Ben-Gurion only saw the beginning of the war and he never saw the twist, the shift. And so he actually died quite heartbroken about the situation in Israel. But thank God we're here. And whilst we look around, I'm also going to show you, here's the famous door. I'm sure some of you have been here before. Whilst groups have been unfortunately cancelling the visit here, we've taken the time to repaint the doors, repaint the wood here in the same colors that were there. So we're about to go inside, and I can show you even the mezuzah, which growing up in England, every Jewish household, most Jewish households had a mezuzah. These weren't here when Ben-Gurion was alive, and when Rabbi said, "But Ben-Gurion, you should put mezuzot up," and he said, "Mezuzot are only for outside Israel. Inside Israel, there's no need." So these were only placed after Ben-Gurion passed away. Paula, his wife, passed away 5 years previous to him in 1968. So here we are. I'm giving a panoramic view. Again, we look forward to seeing you. Some of you come and visit physically, but I have to say that one of the advantages is being able to hop over the ropes and see things which are usually not seen by the regular visitor. And I always find that the map of Israel, which is here, it's literally the size of the doorway. If you can see the size of the doorway into the library and the map, I think it shows how central Israel was to Ben-Gurion. Ben-Gurion arrives here for the first time in 1953 with Paula. He's 67 years old. He's leaving, he left the government, moved to Boker after seeing a group of young people on the way from Rashash, from Elat. He stops the car together with Yitzhak Navon, his then secretary, and who later became the 5th president of Israel. And he asks these young people, "What are you doing here?" And they said to him, "Well, we fought in the War of Independence, and now we need to settle the Negev." He goes home, he writes to them, and he says, "I've never been so jealous of a group of young people. Why couldn't I join them as well?" So he asks to join them. The irony is the first time when they vote, they actually voted against Ben-Gurion joining their settlement. That later became a kibbutz. Ben-Gurion is stubborn, so he wrote to them again and said, "Maybe you'd like to reconsider." And the second time, you don't say no to Ben-Gurion. And he arrived with Paula in 1953. He goes back to office in 1955, and he retires here finally in 1963. So here we have an interesting map where the borders are, it's around the 1950s. We have Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, Haifa. But as you can see, the Negev is very, very desolate. The university is still not here. The university which carries his name, which you're all very close to. And Beersheba is not the metropolis that it is today. It's a very small town, left by the British, left by the Turks, and that's about it in Beersheba.
Esther,
we're in the living room. Yes,
Esther, it's Galit here. As we agreed, I'll be sharing some questions as they come up throughout the tour, because they're also relevant to some of the artifacts and some of the items that we're looking at. The first question that we've got here is from an anonymous attendee who asks, it must be a little shocking for religious visitors to Sde Boker that there are no mezuzot. Is this a source of conversation when people visit, and how do you engage with people and explain this?
Right. So today there are mezuzot. Not all the guides tell the story of there not being mezuzot during his lifetime. But what we do show is that we have here a Jewish home. We can see here an Israeli flag. We can see here a menorah. If we're talking about the Jewish artifacts, here we can see a menorah, which actually plays the Hatikva, the national anthem. So we see a Jewish home, but we don't see an Orthodox home. Ben-Gurion was not an Orthodox Jew. He's a very biblical Jew, and we'll see that in the library in a few minutes. He knows his Bible, I would say, better than a lot of religious Jews that I know. So he knows his Bible, but he's not a practicing Jew. And we encourage Israelis from all walks of life to come, and we're always interested to hear what they say. And I have to say at this point as well that if we're already talking about the religion, we can say it's Ben-Gurion who gives the exemption to around 700 ultra-Orthodox Jews to be exempt from military service. And this changes Israeli societies. Today, we're still dealing with the fact that tens of thousands of young men don't go into the army because of Ben-Gurion's original decision. And he's the one who decides that the halakha, the Jewish law, will actually be the law of the country, even though he himself was not religious. So thank you for that question. It's very interesting. We have very interesting discussions with many visitors, and especially we encourage religious visitors also to come. Thank you. Any other questions?
So far, that's the only one.
Okay, so thank you. So please interrupt me. I enjoy receiving questions. So we've seen the map, and then we see, and it's something which I didn't mention. Everything you see here is basically what Ben-Gurion decides to place on display. He understands that people are going to come and visit. He decides which pictures, he decides which gifts. Many of them are gifts that he received. And we have a storeroom of gifts that he received which are not on display, but he's actually telling us something beyond the grave as well. So next to the map of Israel, we have somebody who you probably recognize. It's the Proclamation of Emancipation of Abe Lincoln. And we'll see a number of leaders in the different rooms. He was a great admirer of Abe Lincoln. And we'll see a similar thread, a joint thread of all the leaders, which we'll connect later. And what we see here is a mix of personal and public. So next to Abe Lincoln, who was no family relation, we have family pictures. We have Ben-Gurion and Paula. Paula he met in 1917 in the library in New York when he came after he was expelled from by the Turks. He meets her, they marry. There's a famous diary entry on that day. It says, studied in the library, married in City Hall, met with the Bund, met with the Jewish community. So there were no real celebrations. And a few weeks later, he joins the British Army. And if I'm not mistaken, he does spend some time even in Canada in training as a British soldier. He doesn't go high up in the ranks, but he joins the British Army. And here, perhaps some of you know, but for those who don't, he had 3 children, Geula, Amos, and Rilana. Geula was their firstborn, meaning redemption. And she was born on the 11th of September, 1919. And Ben-Gurion, and Paula writes to Ben-Gurion, who is training in the British Army, and says, I gave birth to a girl, despite the fact that she's pretty, despite the fact that she looks like you, she's actually quite pretty. So that's Paula for you. And thank you for Mark for telling me that's right. Halifax. He trained in Halifax. He actually gets to Egypt, but he doesn't go far higher than a private. And this is the man who actually creates the IDF, but he wasn't a military man. Thank you, Mark. So we've moved from, so the children actually, none of them go into politics. Amos becomes a deputy police commissioner. Geula and Rilana, they stay in the center of the country, and they're involved in teaching and academics. And none of them moved to the Negev. So the great visionary of the Negev, actually, his children have come to visit, but they didn't move here. Other pictures. We have Plato, again, no relation, but Ben-Gurion, who learns Greek, classical Greek, in order to learn philosophy in the original language. He's fascinated by Greek philosophy, and we'll see other books on philosophy when we go into the library. A telephone. We actually did this with, we had a tour with a group of 5th graders. They couldn't recognize what this was. And we had to show that once upon a time, you actually had to ring. You actually had to dial each number. And if you made a mistake, start from the beginning. And there's a famous scene, if anyone has seen Ben-Gurion Epilogue, very important film. There's a scene where Ben-Gurion receives the telephone, and he says, I wish I'd never received this curse of a telephone. One of his attractions of moving to Boker was that he didn't have to answer the phone, but of course he needed a phone. So that's so this was a curse of the telephone. He receives a television as a present. Very rarely watches it. He says also television will be the destruction of the young people, of the younger generation, which is not far from from the truth. He mainly keeps it because it's an Israeli-made television, and he wants to support Israeli industry, but and he didn't want to offend the donor who came and gave him the television. So that's why he has a television.
Esther, I'm going to interject with a couple of more questions, if that's okay.
Sure.
You just spoke about his children, and this question comes to us from Sharon Choderker, and she asks, please speak more about his children and what they do or did, and how many grandchildren, etc. you had, perhaps even, where did they settle if not in the Negev?
Okay. So Renana stayed in Tel Aviv. None of them are alive today. There are 7 grandchildren. There are many more great-grandchildren. His eldest grandson, Yariv, Geula's son, is now actually quite sick. He's a professor of communications. As I said, Amos became a police commissioner, lived in Haifa. His widow, Mary, actually passed away just a few years ago. And there's a famous story that Amos was fought in the RAF in the in the British Air Force, was wounded, and fell in love with an Irish nurse in when he was being treated, and they fell in love. And Mary was not Jewish, so when they came to Ben-Gurion and said that Amos wanted to get married, but she's not one of us, Ben-Gurion's reply, according to the legend, was even if she supports Jabotinsky, that's fine. So for Ben-Gurion, allegiance was a political allegiance, and when they told him that Mary was not Jewish, he said, that's fine. She underwent a conversion by Rabbi Goren, and as I said, she lived until 2 years ago, actually 2 or 3 years ago in Haifa. But again, none of them go into politics. Ben-Gurion writes many letters, and I'll use this opportunity to say you're welcome to go into the Ben-Gurion Archives. It's open to the public. You don't need a password. And you can find letters to his children, where he usually uses it as a, either to spell out his political feelings, but sometimes he's away for 6 months, a year, and he'll write to Ranana, stop hitting your sister and try and get on. And your mother tells me that you're not getting on with each other. So he's a sort of he's a father from a long distance father, but he tries more with his grandchildren to be more of a grandfather. But Geula says they didn't really see their father. Paula, we'll see over here, she was actually a nurse. When they met, she was a nurse in New York, and she gave everything up. Here we can see Paula, another picture. She was a nurse in New York, in New Jersey, actually, and she gave everything up to raise the children. Amos didn't even have a bar mitzvah. And there's another famous recording in Epilogue where Paula says, when Geula says that Paula used to tell the children that she would eat when their father came home. And when their father came home, she said, I've eaten with the children. And times were hard. In the first few years, there wasn't a lot of money. And she had to deal with everyday matters because Ben-Gurion's head was in much loftier places. So it's Paula who keeps the family together. So that's what I can say about the children. And I'd like to show you a totem pole, which was actually a gift from Vancouver, from the Hadassah Witzo delegation. In 1970, they came, gave Ben-Gurion this totem pole, and it was for him. And he decided that this would definitely be on show in his living room. So he saw that as very important. And here I can show you that there are a wide variety of gifts and different items that he brought from his travels. He was in Africa, he was in Asia, he goes to Burma. Here is a Burmese temple, a copy of the temple where he spent a month in 1961. He visits UNU, the head of Burma. They become friends, they talk about meditation. If it was light outside, I'd show you the statue with Ben-Gurion standing on his head. But Ben-Gurion practices yoga as well. And he's very interested in the East, very interested in Eastern religions. And in the midst of all that, we have Hanukkah. Ben-Gurion loved Hanukkah. He loved mainly festivals which happened in Israel. So Purim, for instance, didn't interest him. But Hanukkah, especially with Hanukkah, with the theme of the minority defeating the majority, was very close to his heart. And therefore we have the Hanukkah. And here is something actually which wasn't here during his lifetime, and it actually relates to the grandchildren. Usually we ask, what do you think it's doing here? But I'll just reply and say this was found after he passed away. Probably belonged to one of the grandchildren, but it sort of resembles his hair, you know. So we left it here. The koala, this was something which wasn't here at the time. And I just wanted to show you two more things. One is here you have Jonah and the whale. He receives it as a gift from B'nai B'rit, who say, just as the whale saved Jonah, so did you save the Jewish people. And he thought this was very important. And a gift from Jewish war veterans from the US, with a quote from Micah. What does God require of you? Only to do justly, love mercy, and to walk humbly with thy God. So this is also something important to hear. And this is where he received his guests. Yes, you've noticed the ashtray. Yes, Ben-Gurion did smoke for a while, but you can also see from the way the chairs are positioned that he really wasn't interested in the TV. It was just something that was there in the background. And before we go back over the ropes, I'll just mention something anecdotal about the curtains. As I said, practically everything here is as authentic and as original as it was. The curtains fell apart after a few years. And so we took this photograph. You can see here Shai Agnon, the famous author, the Nobel Literature winner, Zalman Shazar. And in the background, you can see actually the curtains. And so we sent this picture to Shenkar, the fashion college in Israel, and asked them to reproduce the design. So I can say that the curtains are actually a copy of the original ones. But even if you, please God, when you come, even looking at the ground, at the floor, you can see we've tried to keep the same tiles and only replace the tiles in need of changing. We're going to go to his private quarters, but on the way, I'm going to show you an interesting picture of, it's a three-dimensional picture. On the one in the front, we have the symbol of Israel, which Ben-Gurion himself decides, he's one of those who decides what's going to be on the symbol. If we look from the right, we have Ben-Gurion. And if you look for the left, I don't know if anybody can recognize, we actually have Yitzhak Ben-Zvi, who was the second president of the State of Israel and a close friend. And before we go to the living quarters, just one more certificate, which again, Ben-Gurion decides to place on to exhibit. And it's a certificate from the Hadassah Witzer Organization of Canada on the occasion of his 86th birthday. And a child is being sponsored for them. And this is from October 1972. So again, this wasn't placed just for the visit today. This is here all the time. And here we can see both of them in their later years looking a bit wistful. We'll leave the library to the end because I want to show you a few things. And we're now sort of in their living quarters. And when people come here, some will say, wow, it's so small. And others say that it was relatively big for a kibbutz home. So the opinions differ. But what we do have here is a very large globe, which he receives from General Bradley in 1951, 1952. We've had to cover it because everyone's always touching the globe. But I think it represents what we're doing now. We're so far away, and yet we're all here together here in the home globally. And the other interesting part is actually you can see Ben-Gurion standing with his back to the globe. And if you see him here, basically he was around 5'1", 1.5 meters. So this great man was actually quite short. So you can see that. We have the kitchen. Again, when visitors come, they say, but why was there a kitchen if he lived in a kibbutz? So Paula at the beginning said, I don't trust the hygiene. I'm gonna cook. And so we had a small kitchen. It's a Polish family, so they have their tea set. There are two sinks, not for kashrut standards, but in Israel, you used to have soapy water and then clean water, and that's how they cleaned. I don't think there's anything around. No, there's nothing in the pot. And a few weeks ago, when we had a group of students from the Chapter School in Canada, someone said, look, here's a ninja. So it wasn't called a ninja then, but yes, he had a blender. And the reason he had a blender was for Paula to make him his kuchmuch, which was her smoothie made up of raspberry syrup, apple puree, an egg, yogurt. Here is the recipe in her writing, written. And this is what he would drink every day. Even after she died in 1968, he insisted on his bodyguard making him the kuchmuch, we call it. And here we see the list of medicines that he took and his daily diet. So, Galit, are there any other questions?
Yes, we do have a couple of questions here. I'll ask you one now and maybe one a little bit later on. An anonymous attendee again asks, why did Ben-Gurion choose to retire in Boker, and who did he purchase this property from?
Okay, so why Boker is a very good question. As I said from the story at the beginning, he liked the idea that this was a kibbutz which was not connected to any of the kibbutz movements. He didn't want to associate himself with the kibbutz movement. So the fact that this was an independent kibbutz, unrelated, unaffiliated to any political organization, was important to him. And the importance of the Negev. As you probably know, he said, it's in the Negev that the people of Israel would be tested. And therefore, in 1953, when he comes here, he said, this is what I'm looking for. I want to be a pioneer. I want to go back to when I was in Sedgera as a young man in my 20s, toiling the land, even though he's already 67 years old. And for him, Boker filled all the conditions that he wanted. And regarding the purchase, basically, it was a kibbutz, so it was a kibbutz home, and afterwards he donates the house to the public, but he never really owned this home. He has another home in Tel Aviv. There is a Ben-Gurion home in Tel Aviv, which is also very interesting. But that's why Boker. He wanted people to come to the Negev, and he said, I can't ask people to come if I don't do it myself. So that's why he wants to be a personal example. I hope that answers the question.
And the second part of that question was, who did he purchase it from?
So it was given to him by the kibbutz.
Oh,
it was given to him by the kibbutz, and he didn't need to purchase it. Right. I mean, the ongoing, he doesn't really deal with money at all. They always say he didn't deal with us, but it was given to him as a kibbutz, as being as a member of the kibbutz. This was his, and he was entitled to it. In 1960.
Sorry to interrupt you. Do we know if there was a previous tenant living in the?
So there wasn't a previous tenant, but in 1961 the houses expanded. So at the beginning there was only one bedroom. In 1961, another bedroom is expanded. The whole area is made security, more security tight. So it was definitely bigger than the average. It was basically two houses placed together. So it wasn't inhabited before Ben-Gurion came, in answer to your question. And we're actually here in Paula's bedroom. And you can see it's Paula's room because it's very feminine. It has a bedside table. It has a lot of pictures of their grandchildren. This is something we're not going to see in his bedroom. Different drawings. I know that probably a lot of you have children or grandchildren who will draw something and you keep the drawings. And we actually also have here a very unusual picture of Ben-Gurion kissing his granddaughter, not the usual type that you usually see. But you can see it's a very feminine room. It's a very family-related room. And especially when we have many soldiers here, their first question is, but why did they have separate rooms? It's something which is beyond their understanding. And I'll say this as I come into Ben-Gurion's room, to say this is Ben-Gurion's bedroom. And there are two reasons. One is that Ben-Gurion actually never slept. Well, he did sleep, but no more than 3 hours, 4 hours a night. It's very inconvenient to have a partner who doesn't sleep. And I always say it's very customary in places like Europe at a certain age to have separate rooms. As someone who's been married for quite a while, I thoroughly recommend it, even though the young people don't get me at all. Sorry, that's just a bit of British humor. So we're here in Ben-Gurion's room. As you can see, we haven't been to his library yet, but even though he only sleeps 3 hours a night, even when he does come to sleep, he's still reading. And we can see here the actual book that he was reading before his demise, Au Jérusalem in French, by Claude Lanzmann. He had Mao Zedong's quotations, the Scientific American, biography on Weizmann, and there are also books about Ben-Gurion. So he's already reading about himself during his lifetime. These are his actual slippers, the clothes which were actually laid out for him before his demise. And here is also something that you don't usually see. We also have his suits, his famous British military jacket that he kept from the British Army. And even though he had his tuxedo, his favorite suit was his khaki top and trousers, very comfortable. Here's a few pairs of shoes, and not many. And we try and keep it as preserved as possible. Again, something that you don't usually see on a regular visit. Any questions, Galit?
Yeah, there's several more. What are some of the neatest stories that you have heard from guests about David Ben-Gurion lore?
So I'll give one in 1 minute. After I just mentioned the safe. In the safe, there wasn't money, really. There was just a gun and security documents about the security situation, which he had to keep. And before I tell you one anecdote, there is one photograph, one picture in Ben-Gurion's home, in his bedroom. And it's actually not of a Zionist leader, not of anybody in Judaism, not even of his family, but it's actually of Mahatma Gandhi. And Mark and I discussed this earlier. Gandhi was not actually so pro-Israeli. He was actually assassinated in 1948, but Ben-Gurion saw him as a fellow fighter for independence. Both of them fought the British for independence, and he had a great admiration for Gandhi. And in the past year, we've had a lot of contact with the Gandhi Museum to try and work together. And it's an interesting choice. He actually says he admires the non-violence. He admires his fortitude, and so Gandhi is the only picture we have in the home. I'll just tell us a short story. The United Nations Secretary General actually came to visit here at the end of the 1950s, and no one knew where he was going to stay because there were only 2 bedrooms. So Paula gave up her room, gave it to the Secretary General. She went to sleep with a friend in the kibbutz. And of course, Ben-Gurion knew absolutely nothing about it because he was not interested in any of the logistics. And in the morning, he woke up, Paula was already here, and she dealt with all the other arrangements. So that's one story about a special visitor who came. Another visitor who came was Conrad Adenauer, the German Chancellor. And it's actually 70 years since the reparations agreement. And he actually sits here in the library. These two leaders who forge a friendship and against all odds, despite the history of Germany and the Jewish people. And Adenauer comes here in 1966 after they'd met in the Waldorf Astoria in 1960. And Adenauer eats in the communal kitchen, and he comes to visit Ben-Gurion here in 1966. He was already 90 years old. He passed away a year later. So we were just talking about that actually yesterday. And we're actually in the final room. Final room is the library, which is the biggest room. And Galit, I'd appreciate, I'll just say a few things about the library and then we'll open it for questions. Notice that actually some of we're using this time during the 5th wave of COVID to first of all replace, or not to replace, to restore the wood or the wooden shelves, to actually classify the books. It's been nearly 50 years since he passed away, and even though we had a list, we had a list of the books, no one had actually opened each one. So we have somebody, Amit, who sits here every day. He goes through every book. There are over 5,000 books here, and he's actually taking he takes a photo of each book. Who was it dedicated by? So soon everything will be online, and you'll be able to see all the books that there are here. I think there was a question there, but we'll go through it in a minute, just so that you see how it looked like then. Here's the library, lots of books and lots of papers. And Ben-Gurion sits here with his radio. He does listen to the radio. And across, he sees a statue of Moses, the greatest Jew who ever lived, he always says. So here is a statue of Moses, which is actually Michelangelo, a copy of Michelangelo's. And you actually see there are horns coming from his head because of the Christian interpretation that it says when Moses shone, they translated it, and he had horns, and it was all for thousands of years there was a belief that Jews had horns. So we have Moses. We have books on practically every subject. We always joke that there's no cookery books, there are no novels, but there's books, Yoga for Americans. If you knew, there is actually Yoga for Americans, Judo, there's philosophy, there's history, there's geography, Bible. Ben-Gurion learned 9 languages, and someone didn't turn off the alarm. So that's what usually happens if you hop over the ropes. And here you have Zeno, the Greek philosopher, and a small Buddha. And his table, simple chair, simple glasses, a Hebrew-English dictionary, a Bible, and his papers. This is what we have here. And history books and more history books and Bibles. He wrote about 30 books, and he spends most of his time here writing letters, answering letters, and being in touch with the world. So when you come next time, you'll be able to see the library as it is. And now you can see it being during the work as we're doing it now. And I'm now going to sit down and answer any questions that you have.
Thank you so much, Esther, for the tour and for taking some of the questions. We still have quite a few questions that we'd like to get through, and I'll come back on camera here. Give me 1 second. Oh, okay, I'll be back on camera in just a moment. But I have a couple of questions, and I wonder if we can go back. I know you just sat down. I apologize. I'm going to make you get up again. I wonder if we can go back to his bedroom and the safe. I'm very curious to find out what was in the safe. Do we know?
Right.
Or is it still locked up?
Okay, so it's actually still locked up.
Oh.
When Ben-Gurion comes for a time, he's still the sorry, I'll show you the safe again. He's still the security minister. So there are confidential reports, there's papers which you can't leave lying around. So that's what was inside. And there's a revolver. There's one gun there. Actually, I'm not supposed to go over the thing. No, it's definitely locked. So that was the object of the safe. Documents, his gun, and I'll use the opportunity also to show that if you look at the windows, they were also built, because this was built in 1961. They were built so that it would be above his head. So if, God forbid, there was an assassination attempt, it wouldn't be, Ben-Gurion would be covered because the windows were above his height. So that's another element of the of his room.
Okay.
And other questions?
Yeah. So another question that was posed to us is, could you please repeat the recipe for the, I want to pronounce this correctly, kuchmuch?
Kuchmuch, yes.
Yes. Okay.
Apparently, it's not the most tastiest thing.
Oh, okay. Because the person who's posing this question said it sounds like it could be a great drink, but you're saying it wasn't the tastiest.
Okay. He actually wrote in his diary that he really suffered when he ate it. But so it's over here. It's a soft egg, milk, raspberry syrup, apple puree, and you mix it all up. And as I said, even after she died, he said, I think, out of my love to your mother, he says to his children, I'm still going to have my kuchmuch. So sometimes we, on Shavuot, the festival of dairy, sometimes we have a workshop of making the kuchmuch. That's one of our programs.
Okay, and right beside that list, there was also a list of medications. Were there certain illnesses that he was grappling with?
Right. So the irony with Ben-Gurion, he's a sickly child. If you've seen pictures of him, he has a very big head. He's a small body. That's one of the reasons why he starts meditation and he stands on his head. So he's a sickly child, and sometimes he works, and then it's sort of like a collapse, and then he has to recover. But he wasn't that, he didn't really have severe illnesses. You can see there are different creams and different vitamins which he had. Remember that Paula was a nurse, so she was very dedicated to his health. And he dies of old age. He doesn't die of an illness of sort. He just his demise is quite quick, but he's relatively well until the age of 86, and he died at the age of 87. So it's true. Paula looked after him well. She it was important to her.
Yeah. You spoke about Gandhi, and I'm very curious about some of the work you're potentially looking at doing with the museum in India in collaboration with, of course, the home.
Right. So I mentioned earlier that to Mark and to Shimi that in 2 days' time, we are commemorating 30 years of diplomatic relations between India and Israel. India actually didn't vote for a Jewish state in 1947. Only in 1950 did they recognize Israel, and only in 1992 was an embassy established. So since then, in the past year, we've had joint tours where there's somebody in the Gandhi Museum, somebody here, and we always joke because here we talk about how, I'll just show you Ben-Gurion's bedroom again, we say how modest he was and how he had a very simple bedroom. And then when we see Gandhi's room in Gujarat, he basically slept on the floor. So in comparison, Ben-Gurion's bedroom is like, you know, like a 5-star hotel compared to Gandhi. But we try and take it to the way of the simplicity, how they were both pragmatists, how they were both had long-term vision. And we invite Indian schools and Israeli schools to join this joint virtual tour.
We've got another question here that asks, it's interesting that David Ben-Gurion went from Segera at Golani Junction in the north to Sde Boker in the south. Are there any memorabilia from his period in the north prior to entering into politics?
Right, so he does go to, he arrives in Jaffa. We actually have, I'll send it to you tomorrow. We actually have the original postcard as he writes to his father when he arrives in Jaffa in 1906. From there, he goes to Petach Tikva, and then he goes to Sedra. And he loves the time there. There's still a farm there. There are tours there. But very soon, he decides that the Negev is the future. He doesn't forget about the Galil. He says the Galil is also very important. But he sees the Negev. Here you can start from the beginning. There's something. I mean, I know that Ben-Gurion University is very central on the idea of innovation. The idea that in the desert you can start afresh, not in Tel Aviv and not in Jerusalem. And I think that's what he really wanted to create. And he speaks about an Oxford and a Yavne. He wants an Oxford University here. He wants a spiritual center here. And when he talks about it in 1960, people say, you're mad. We're in the middle of this wilderness. What are you talking about, Oxford University? And yet, 3 miles from here are the Desert Research Institutes of Ben-Gurion University, where people come from all over the world to study desert research. So this crazy idea and this crazy vision actually came true.
Mm-hmm. It was very interesting too when you mentioned the will that he asked to keep things as they were, and he wanted the home to be accessible to the people, to the public.
Right.
I'm wondering how much of his home is actually preserved. How many of the artifacts? I mean, I'm assuming many of the artifacts are kept in good condition because you want to be able to preserve it for years. But how much of the home is preserved? How much is curated more so as a museum?
It's an ongoing struggle, because in theory, if we close the door and locked it up, it would be the best, because that would be the best way to keep everything in pristine condition. But we want to bring children, we want to bring people from overseas, we want visitors to come. So it's this conflict, how much we want to show it as much as possible. But I can say, for instance, we paint, every 2 or 3 years we repaint the walls in the same shade that Paula wanted. Paula loved green, probably connected to her nursing days. It's sort of like relaxing color. So we painted green. I spoke about the curtains. As I said, the flooring, we on purpose did not replace the flooring, but every time something breaks, we'll replace it with a new one. So you can actually see different shades. And apart from that, we've sent the cloths, the carpets to be cleaned, but we really try to keep it as preserved, as original, as authentic as it was during the time. Again, it's something that we deal with on a daily basis, how to keep it in good condition. because we want people of all ages to come here and to visit. It's important. That was his will, as you said. He wanted people to come. If when you come, there are additional exhibitions around which we can't see at the moment because it's all dark. And we welcome you to visit next time you're here, hopefully, weather and COVID permitting.
Correct, right. We have a comment from Miriam Cohen who says, this is so interesting. One learns so much about him. I have kibbutz relatives whose homes are so similar. And a question from Monica Shapiro who asks, where did he live while his children were growing up?
Right, so he lived in Tel Aviv. His home is in Ben-Gurion Boulevard. Then it wasn't called Ben-Gurion Boulevard. So the children grew up in Tel Aviv. And when they come here, when Paula and Ben-Gurion come here, as I said, Ben-Gurion is 67, Paula is 62. The children, Amos and Gola, were already married at the time. Renan was 25. So they come here on their own and the children visit. So they come here for the weekend, they come here to visit. Paula goes every 2 weeks to Tel Aviv. She probably needed a bit of retail therapy to get out of the desert for once in a while. She goes to visit the children, the grandchildren, but then she comes back. And Ben-Gurion always remembers her sacrifice, because when he decides to come, he tells Paula, you stay in Tel Aviv, and every 2 weeks we'll meet up. And she says, wherever you go, I will go. And she has a hard time. She doesn't have friends here. The weather is very difficult. Everyone is very young here, but she stays here. And Ben-Gurion actually dedicates one of his books with a quote from Jeremiah, you followed me into the wilderness, and I will never forget this sacrifice that you made. It's a quote from the book of Jeremiah.
Wow, that's powerful. Just maybe one or two more questions. Why do you think he asked in his will that there not be any obituaries said at his funeral, and what was done at his funeral?
So I mentioned Ben-Gurion Epilogue, the film. If you haven't seen it, I recommend seeing it. There's footage from Paula's funeral where he's devastated because everything he learned was from books. He never finishes university, the Ben-Gurion University, and yet he never finishes university anywhere. And he reads that women usually outlive men, live longer than men. So when Paula died, he's devastated and decides to bury her in Midrasha Ben-Gurion, in the Midrasha not far from here. And he doesn't want an obituary, I think, because he said, and he says this also in Epilogue, he said, it wasn't just me. I was always surrounded by people. I always did things with other people. It's not me. I did not create the state. It was always with another group of people. And he always remembers his friends from the second Aliyah who made Aliyah with him, Ben Svi and others. So he didn't like the pomp around it. And I think that sort of explains it. Because it happens after the horror, after the shock of the Yom Kippur War, when you see footage of Ben-Gurion's funeral, everyone is very morose. Everyone is very. I think people are still in shock. There's a Moshe Dayan is there, and Peres is there, and when Ben-Gurion dies, it's the end of an era. But it's also a month and a half after the outbreak of the Yom Kippur War. So there's a feeling in the country that something beyond a man has died. And that's why it's very, the actual funeral, I think you can probably see on YouTube, you see the funeral and there's I think there's mostly shock, not because he was a young man, but because it's an end of an era.
Right. We're pretty much out of time. One final question for you here from Rachel Alkali. Did Ben-Gurion live alone after Paula's death, or did he have a caregiver?
So both really. He lived alone. He had security guards all the time. and he had a housekeeper who would make his kuchmuch, who would clean, who would tidy up for him. He refused to move. He insisted on staying here. There's another anecdote that it's Purim, and some children come in fancy dress costumes, and he's alone here. And he said, "But why are these children dressed up?" Like he had no idea that it was a festival, but he insisted on being here. But he was looked after. He was. I don't think actually somebody stayed here physically, but he was always surrounded by security, and there was a housekeeper who came in every day. Definitely.
Esther, thank you so much. I appreciate it. This is fascinating. Mark?
Esther,
Thank you, Galit.
Thanks, Galit. Outstanding as always. Esther, I have to say, no matter how many times I take a tour, I'm introduced to the hut, the tzrif, I learn more and more things. The stories about his mezuzot I was not aware of, but I would also like to tell you, I don't know if you're aware, that the Azrieli Center for Israel Studies in the Boker campus of Ben-Gurion is going to find a new home in May of 2022, thanks to a very generous donation by donors who wish to remain anonymous. The David Ben-Gurion Institute and the National Archive building, the David Ben-Gurion National Archive building, will be opening in Boker, right next to the Water Institute. It's a magnificently designed building, and the inside will have state-of-the-art section where his original writings will be on display and will be studied. Now, if anyone has never had the outstanding opportunity to listen or to read what he has written, he was a prolific writer, and he would write every day in his personal agenda. And I've already heard 3 times, or rather on 3 different occasions, his writings on May 12th, 13th, and 14th, the 2 days before the proclamation of the State of Israel, and exactly what issues, the terrible issues he had to, and decisions he had to make, because he knew that, quote, our sons are going into battle. So it's a fascinating inyan thing, and I really urge everyone from May on, as long as COVID allows, to visit this magnificent building, the archives and the institute.
We're very excited about that. We're also excited about the archive. I'll just add something small. We have all the letters that he wrote to people, because he made a copy. He made a carbon copy of every letter that he wrote. Today, young people don't know what a carbon copy is. So we have every single letter that Ben-Gurion wrote as well. And we're also very excited about the new archive building.
Yeah, that was I have to take personal credit for that one, but it'll be fantastic. It'll be just fantastic. And also, I happen to be someone who subscribes to auctions in various things in North America, and at least once every 2 months, there's an original letter signed by Ben-Gurion at auction. Now, depending on, I've bid a few times, but have been outbid, because they go for thousands of dollars sometimes.
Wow.
Fascinating. Anyways, again, Esther, outstanding. Rav Todot. It must be your British your British and our common Commonwealth genes. Fascinating tour and insight into David Ben-Gurion and Paula. And our listening audience, just a reminder that we will be holding a webinar like we did last year on International Women's Day, March 8th. So please check your emails. The details will follow. Again, many, many thanks to our almost 150 or over 150 person listening audience, our guide Esther, Galit for her outstanding moderation, my staff, our leaders, our lay leaders, our colleagues at Ben-Gurion University, and our supporters. Everyone stay COVID-free in Canada. wear your parkas. In Israel, wear your also parkas and your raincoats. Keep well, and until we meet next time, I bid you all COVID safe and good days. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Stay well.